folks.
We're live.
We are live.
We're live.
Welcome.
Welcome
To
to
the vibe.
Cinematary. None of us are going to watch Don't Look Up because it's 2.5 hours
Yeah.
and we got lives to live, you know?
We got things to do. I don't even know what this movie is. Nobody tell me. I don't want to know.
Exactly.
We are going to talk about 2.5 hour movies on this episode.
That is.
Ew.
Licorice Pizza 2:15.
Oh, I thought it was 2.5.
It should be. I'd take 15 more minutes.
Give me another slice of pizza.
Hey, give me another slice of that
Licky pizza.
licky pizza. There you go.
Groovy.
Oh, man.
All right, here we go. Y'all just figure out when you're going to say what.
Okay.
You go first.
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
But just say your first name. That's what I'm trying to get this trend going.
No, I always say my whole name.
Andrew Kyle Swafford.
Not
I'm
that
going
much.
Too much.
to say my. Well, we're to the Bible series. You'd say your biblical name.
Andrew Swafford
Andrew
of the
is a
Swaffords.
biblical name.
Jesse is a biblical name. And somebody's
Zach.
dad. Zachariah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Probably.
I'm rocking and rolling. Here we go.
Rock and
Yeah.
roll, man.
In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 384 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with.
Andrew Swafford.
And Jesse.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be concluding our cinematic journey through the Bible with a movie that that is not involved in the Bible, but kind of is a little bit with 1979.
It's apocryphal.
Yeah. With 1979's Monty Python's Life of Brian. Real quickly, head over to cinematary.com. We got some good Bible writing. Again, I'm going to keep hyping up Cam's Silence essay and Michael's O'Malley's Noah essay. So
We also
keep 'em
got
up there.
a this is incoming. Maybe it'll be on the site by the time this episode goes live. But we got an essay coming in from the one and only Logan Kenny
Hey.
about the movie Drive My Car, which I've been hearing more and more good stuff about.
Every
wanna
time
see
I
it.
hear or see the name of it, I feel like they're talking about the Beatles song.
Yeah, I mean it's adapted from a Murakami story, and
Yeah.
Murakami loves the Beatles, so that is an intentional allusion. Yeah.
Rock and roll.
It's a nice movie that only people who live in New York and LA can watch. So congrats to them.
And I guess
Fuck the rest of us.
who lives in
That's-
Scotland.
And I guess Logan and Scott. Well, I'm sure they got some good movie theaters in Scotland. So really, fuck the rest of us because we're having to watch. Well, one of these movies we're having to watch. The other one we're joyfully getting to watch. Let's start with a fun one.
Licky pizza?
Yeah, but let's talk about some Licky Pizza.
Licky pizza. Did you watch it too, Zach?
I did.
He did.
Oh,
Yeah.
rock and roll.
What did you guys think of Licky Pizza?
I guess I can kind of start like a smidgen.
Can we preface your review by saying that Paul Thomas Anderson is your favorite filmmaker?
Bro, you should have just that's exactly what I was gonna say.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Sheesh. that was pretty much all I was gonna say.
Okay.
I think we were talking one day, and we were going through like directors that I'm aware of, and directors that I've seen multiple movies of, and I was trying to figure out, do I have a favorite currently still making movies director?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I can 100% confidently say this, but I think Paul Thomas Anderson might be my favorite director currently
We're also
alive.
talking about Miyazaki, but Miyazaki's like technically retired.
Yeah.
Well, Paul Thomas Anderson is my favorite Orson Welles movie.
Love
So.
I guess what I love so much about his movies is he just really brings characters to life. He makes such distinct and odd little people, and you just get to spend time with these people and really just watch them go. It's just like winding up a little robot and just kind of watching it do all its little things, and you just hang out with them. That's what's so neat. He just creates a vibe, and he creates all of these really, really unique, flawed but interesting and lovable people. And then you just kind of watch them go. And whether that it's got like a really dicey, intense plot, or whether you're just kind of floating and hanging out, either way, I think he manages to do both incredibly well. And Licorice Pizza is no exception to that.
I mean, it's maybe like the best example of the specific thing you're talking about, of just kind of like hanging out with interesting people.
Yeah, just winding up all these little things and just watching them go and interact with each other and stuff. All of these characters, like that's the thing about him. He makes these characters that are like lovely and so annoying too, like both at the same time. And you can't help but love them and think that they're just little dumbasses.
Yeah.
And so
dipshit is the word that gets used in this movie the most. He's also used in interviews to describe the characters.
And they're just so funny. Like just watching this teenager, he's a little entrepreneur, thinking of the next stupid thing he's gonna do, but he goes in like just full force. And it's such an interesting contrast to Alana.
We should probably say what this movie is about.
Okay, so Licorice Pizza.
Is it really about anything?
It's not really about anything. It's set in the 70s.
73.
1973 in California. I guess it's loosely kind of based off of his youth.
Yeah, San Fernando Valley, that's where he grew up.
Yeah, and kind of his early days, kind of getting into the filmmaking industry. It stars Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. What's his first name? Cooper Hoffman.
Come on.
And
look at the cat and remember.
Alana Haim from the musical group Haim. And actually all the Haim sisters are in the movie, and I guess the Haim parents too.
The Haim parents are also in the movie.
Because I guess the whole Haim family is good friends with Paul Thomas Anderson. And it's about a teenage boy who's played by Cooper Hoffman, who is a young, I guess, child actor. It seems like his acting days may be a thing of the past. There's an audition scene that he's in where he's trying to get another gig, and I don't know.
He's starting to age out of the roles that he has connections for.
I mean, you watch him do this audition, and I think you're supposed to feel very, very underwhelmed by his performance for this audition.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really let that steam or that loss of steam like kill his energy and joy. So the whole movie, there's not really much of a plot to it. It's just kind of him coming up with some new grand idea and just going in it with full confidence and full force, whether that's selling waterbeds or creating an arcade. And he just does it and with complete confidence. And it's just funny because he's
a bit of a hustler.
Yeah.
Yeah, he never has a fear of failure. He just goes for it, and then when it doesn't work, he just comes up with a new idea and rolls with it. And Alana, meanwhile, he meets her in the first scene, and it's this beautiful long scene just with these two characters. He like immediately is in love with her. He sees her, he's like, this is it, and he plays up his little charm. And she's like almost a decade older than him.
Yeah, she is a decade
older. A 25-year-old photographer. He kind of feels
15.
like she's sort of wasting away. She doesn't really feel like she's got a lot of promise or a lot of another good step to take in her, mid-20s, which I think really resonates with a lot of people kind of in that mid-20s of like, okay, is the thing I'm doing now where I'm meant to be, where I want to be, where I'm always going to be?
Is there anywhere higher I can climb? Yeah. Or am I stuck in this spot?
Am I going to be stuck here? Yeah. Is this all there is for me? And she feels very stuck. And then she meets this teenager who just feels like he's got his whole world ahead of him. And she can't help but be very curious, if not like kind of laughing at him, but kind of in like amused and interested in just his confidence and energy. And he immediately asks her out, immediately wants to spend time with her. And she's just like, am I crazy for kind of digging this ridiculous situation? And not necessarily in a romantic way, just in like a fun and curious way. And that's pretty much the movie. It's just her continuing, despite maybe her best judgment, to hang out with him and his rambunctious little teenage friends and get into all of their entrepreneurial mischief and shenanigans.
I mean, you said there's no central plot, but the central plot is, or the central conflict, I guess, is that he wants to be with her.
Right.
And like, that is one of two things that have made this movie like radioactively controversial online, because it is about like a minor in like pursuing a romantic relationship with someone who is 10 years older than him.
Yeah.
And the movie is, in a way, kind of structured as like a romantic comedy.
Right.
And there's been a lot of debate about like how we, the audience, are supposed to feel about this, like what lines are and are not crossed, and what are we as audience members like, willing to kind of allow ourselves to buy into romantically on screen with something
Right.
like this. There's also the question of like where the relationship ends up, which I think we can't really talk about without spoiling the movie, and I don't want to spoil the movie for people. But I mean, that is definitely like a reservation that I have about the movie.
Mhm.
Like, to what extent would this be as like cute and fun as it is if the genders were swapped?
Right.
Like, I can think of 3 movies in recent years that have kind of dealt with underage boys in relationships with people who are adults. This movie, Call Me by Your Name, and Garden of Words by Makoto Shinkai.
There's probably plenty more.
And
too.
and it's interesting, like all 3 of those are like male leads.
Mhm.
And I think the conversation would be different if it was a female lead.
Oh, I could think of a female lead movie in An Education too.
And Education, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. But that one is much more like overtly dark, and
Yeah.
like we are kind of meant to feel as though the character is making a grave mistake
Right.
on one level.
But I guess with this one, it's kind of hard to tell where exactly how you're supposed to feel as an audience with the whole thing. I don't think that it ever feels like the movie is framing this as like creepy. And I also think that it's fair to acknowledge that probably every teenager's had a crush on somebody who's quite a bit older than them.
And this is based
And if
on
we're
Paul Thomas
pretending
Anderson.
that's not true, like
Yeah.
it is true. Whether or not that should be reciprocated, I think we can agree when we're in our mid-20s that no, obviously it shouldn't be.
Right.
But when you are young and you see people who just seem so charming and older and have their selves together, but that's not the case here.
No.
He just falls in love with her just because he does.
It is kind of a similar dynamic to Shinkai's Garden of Words,
Right.
where you have a minor character who's kind of like wise beyond his years, and then an adult female character who's like in this state of arrested development, and it like basically still lives as a child, and it's kind of about like both movies are kind of about those lines being a little blurrier than like the law makes them out to be.
Anyway, we've been rambling.
Well, you think about what's great about the movie is it also structures. It has that, but then I think it works because it structures the adults as also none of the adults are really good in this movie.
Right.
You think of whether it's like the Sean Penn character,
Bradley Cooper's character is absolutely a child.
Bradley Cooper's character
He just
is
breaks
absolutely a
things.
child.
It's like PTA just threw in just a little extra like he was like, let's just dump like a whole bag of chaos into this one guy.
Yeah.
We'll just divvy it out a little bit for everybody else, but this guy gets a whole bag all to himself.
And so I think what keeps like bringing the Alana character back to Gary is that she constantly kind of hits a point where she's like, he's so immature, I just can't do this anymore, and like tries to find an adult person to like move forward. And then she slowly begins to, each time she'll slowly realize how childish and how like underdeveloped the adult characters are, from the Sean Penn character who is this kind of TV movie star who is just there drinking and cavorting and just doing things like that. You have the Bradley Cooper character who's like smashing everything. I think you get, if it's not too spoilery, you get like to her most adult person with the Benny Safdie character at the end, who you kind of like categorize. Okay, so this is an adult together person who like seems like you're going in a like serious path, and then that kind of dissipates. And so there's that line at the end where they go, they're all shits, aren't they? And it's like it's kind of the sweet line about relationships, but it's also just this kind of like, I feel like that's like the lexicon for the whole movie is you just realize that they're all just kind of shits, and that Gary, while younger and also a kind of a hustler himself who will probably become a shit later on, like there's still like this purity to him that I think that's what keeps bringing her back, that even though he's 15 and bouncing between different businesses, he at least is like genuine in his affection for her.
Yeah, I mean it is kind of like an embodiment of that cliche about adults not really knowing what they're doing either. All the adults in this movie are just kind of like trying to make it work. But
It is really funny, like having entered, later 20s now. I'm kind of now finally in like full swing career mode, Jess. Finally, year 2 of career mode. Um, and it's funny, like I constantly feel like, God, I've just barely got myself together right now.
right.
But I always have thought like the adults around me, they really have themselves together, and they mostly don't either. Like everybody's
Right.
just sort of making up. One day I sent a picture of my breakfast to like a friend of mine, and I was eating like pirate's booty and an energy drink, and that was my breakfast. And I was like, I'm a mess. And my friend responded, and it was really sweet. And she said, "Don't let anybody make you think that they are not like in the same exact place as you are. Like we're all just making it up, and everybody
Yeah.
is just like barely keeping themselves together most days,
And
and
that's
people
what
eating crap like that too. It's not just you."
Yeah, and that's what I love about this movie. I think that,
Yeah.
Paul Thomas Anderson has kind of got not that, like, Phantom Thread or well, Phantom Thread is really rambly, but, like, he's kinda got to, like, this point in his career where he makes these movies where, like, the important, like, overall
Mhm.
like, the message is kind of in the background, and the
Yeah.
foreground is just, like, kind of like what you were talking about at the beginning, why you like him. Like, it's just
Right.
kind of accentuating these personalities, these characters,
It's
and just,
human.
Well,
like,
they're all
living.
about like all the late period, quote unquote, Paul Thomas Anderson movies, which I'm going to define as like Punch Drunk Love onward, are kind of about two big personalities, kind of like duking it out over the course of the movie. Like in Punch Drunk Love, you have Barry and then Lena. In There Will Be Blood, you have Daniel Plainview and the pastor character played by Paul Dano. I mean, and you could go down the list of all of them.
Mm.
Phantom Thread, obviously, Vicky Creeps and
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Daniel Day-Lewis's character, right? And here, like we've been talking about, we have this like kind of shitheel 15-year-old and like this juvenile 25-year-old played by Alana Haim. My favorite scene of the movie is like the only scene that gets overtly confrontational between them, where she like leans down to him, like he's sitting at a desk and she leans down over him and says, "I'm cooler than you." And like that scene plays out for quite a
That's
while.
exactly what somebody who's cool would say,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right.
Um,
Well, it's funny. People have been kind of linking this with Boogie Nights as
Mm.
like this is like that's
I
kind
really
of the.
don't see that
I don't
connection.
see it either. I
Yeah.
see it more with like Inherent Vice, which is a movie that I've
Mhm.
started to appreciate more and more and more.
Right.
The more each time I've seen it, because that's a movie that like the Joaquin Phoenix character is just like rambling through this world that has like a bunch of like there's stuff happening in that movie, but it's not the most important. Like it's like what it's focusing on is the mundane, stupid shit that like Joaquin Phoenix is getting into. But then there's also this like big shit that's happening in the background that you kind of have to pay attention to like see it.
Yeah.
And like I think that that's more like there's big important like there's shit going on in this movie, but that's not what you're
Right.
focused on. You're focused on just this, the silly stuff. I mean, like that scene when they go to Bradley Cooper's house is
Mhm.
just that whole sequence is the
God.
fucking best. It's
Yeah.
so like holy
The
shit.
yes, the like it's an action set piece
Yeah.
essentially. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like a shot like a car chase scene, but it's only in one car.
God.
But yeah, I think the connection in Inherent Vice is a perfect connection because in that movie there's like all this political unrest that's happening in the
Mhm.
background, and there's like the CIA infiltrating like Black liberation groups and stuff like that. But like our character is too stoned and like too confused by the complexity of the situation to really notice what's happening. And also like you can't blame him because like who can notice those like grand conspiratorial things like happening in the background of American history as they're happening. And in this case, like it's much more like obvious stuff that the main character is missing. Like Alana Haim says this like very overtly at several points in the movie, like that Cooper Hoffman's character doesn't know what's going on in the world.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like there's this gas shortage because of like American foreign policy. And it's directly affecting him because it directly affects his business, but he doesn't understand it at all. And like, if we're talking about this movie as like a movie about youth, or even about like adulthood and like not really having much of a grasp on adulthood, like that is a part of both of those experiences.
I
Like,
think too, like her decision towards the end of the movie to try to get involved with the guy
Mhm.
who's running for mayor. She's like,
politics,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, I'm tired of just like floating around. I got to get involved. Like, this is what's going to make me important. I need to be important. And to be
Mhm.
important, I'm going to get involved politically and care. And I think a lot of 20 somethings, 30 somethings, like millennials, were getting
Sure.
frustrated. We want to kind of get involved, but then kind of flailing it. What does that actually mean? What kind of change can we actually affect?
Mhm.
And like, you know, sort of realizing that we are kind of powerless in a lot.
I think Paul Thomas Anderson is also working on this level lately that's similar to Wes Anderson, where like I don't think they're overtly political directors, but they like to kind of like put, and I think that annoys people because they feel like it should be in the like that's what you should be like reckoning with like politics, and I think
Mhm.
both of them kind of put it like in the background to these other things, to these characters, to these other moments, like more personal moments. And to me, I think that's just more effective. Like I think that the politics of like Grand Budapest Hotel or the French
Yeah.
Dispatch is way more interesting than, you know, this political moment. I mean, like we were joking
The Adam
before.
McKay style.
The
of
Adam McKay
political
stuff,
filmmaking,
exactly.
yeah.
Like, don't look up. Like, I think it's much more because it puts it like on this personal level, and I think you can like respond to it better because that's what's happening. Like, it's not like even though we know that climate change is happening, it's not like we're directly necessarily engaged with like the up and down of it. It's like it's something that's
Right.
happening on this like monumental scale that like we're just little ants to. And I think
Mhm.
that's how Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson like operate with their
Right.
movies as well.
Mhm. We've been talking about it for a long time, but I do want to talk about two other things before we leave Licorice Pizza behind. One is just like the filmmaking style.
Mhm.
I think that I said a couple weeks ago that West Side Story was a movie that like kind of made me realize how shoddily made a lot of modern movies are. And this is another example of like something that just like feels cinematically a cut above what 90% of what's coming out.
Absolutely.
And we were actually fortunate enough to be able to see this on 35 millimeter at the Belcourt in
cool.
Nashville, and it just like had such a great like texture and feel to it.
It was very grainy. I mean, like
Yeah.
even the opening shot, especially, is just this walk through the high school, and it really did feel like you were just watching a movie right out of the era.
But I mean, I think even if you're not getting to see it on a format like that, it is like very thoughtfully shot. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is a really, and I don't know if this has always been true about his movies, but in this movie specifically, like he has like really effective use of close-ups. Like so much of this movie is just like really, really tight shots on people's faces. And a lot of the comedy of the movie a lot of the comedy and a lot of the more emotional stuff in the movie kind of comes from these small gestures in people's body language and eye movements and things like that you ordinarily like you either wouldn't pick up on, or the director is not caring enough to ask the actors to do, or caring enough to focus on with the camera. But it creates like lots of little like minute interpersonal dynamics where you're kind of like reading how people are like reacting to each other and like withholding their reactions from each other. The one of the funniest scenes of the movie is a scene where Alana Haim is being interviewed by a casting agent, and it's an extremely close shot on that casting agent's face. And I don't think I've ever seen this woman in a movie before, and I don't remember her name at the top of my head. I'm sorry, but like the things that she does with like her upper lip and her nose and like her eyelids, like they just twitch in like the most hilarious and effective ways.
Her character's only in the movie for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we never come back to her. But it's a lot. It's comparable to Bradley Cooper's character and just how completely unhinged this very small interaction is that we never return to.
Right.
Where she's like excited, but it's almost like I don't know if she's on like she thinks she's like coked up or something. Like
I can't tell.
She's
it's hysterical.
excited and happy and furious and I don't know.
You can see her
like
cycling through a whirlwind of emotions, just like sitting behind this desk listening to this girl explain what she can do as an actress.
I love watching actors' faces in movies.
Well, it's Harriet Sansom Harris. She was in she plays the American heiress in Phantom Thread, who they like go to her hotel room and take her dress off.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been really wanting to rewatch Phantom Thread. We need to do it. And when you're not getting those close-up shots, which like that's how most of like the dialogue scenes are shot in this movie. the camera is usually moving. Like sometimes it kind of breaks pace because there's all these like montage sequences where the characters are running from one place to another. Like it is a very youthful movie in like the physicality of it. Like you're just watching these teenage boys and Alana Haim just kind of like running around their neighborhood. And the camera is kind of like always keeping pace with them, and things are just whizzing by the camera faster for you to register. And so there's just like this sense of exuberance to the film that I really responded to.
It's loving. It's very sweet and tender at its core, and playful. Do we need to comment on the?
Well, that's why I said there were two things we should probably talk about, like the camera work, and then we should also address like the other controversy about this movie, which is like the Asian representation. There was a viral TikTok of a woman kind of arguing that people should not go see Licorice Pizza because it has these jokes in it that are racist against Asian people. And like, I wouldn't necessarily argue like too vehemently against somebody who was Asian and was offended by the way that that stuff is handled in this movie. But I think that like it is maybe a little bit more well handled than the discourse around it is making it out to be. The joke in question is a white character who's married to an Asian woman who...
Two different Asian women.
At various points in the movie, two different Asian women.
Yeah.
When he speaks to another white person, he speaks in his normal voice, but when he speaks to his wife or other wife, he speaks in this like exaggerated Asian accent. Like he's still speaking English, but as if it was like somebody who...
He's like translating for her when people are speaking English to him and her, but his translation is just English, but sounding like an Asian caricature or something. Like he just sounds ridiculous. It's very obvious that we're supposed to watch him and be like, oh, look at this fucking asshole.
Right. Like the joke is get a load of this asshole.
Get a load of this asshole. And this he just feels so bad for these women. And I think the joke is like further shown to show how much of an asshole he is, because the next time you see this character, he's married to a different Asian woman, and you're like, oh God, now she has to put up with this bullshit.
And I also learned recently that Paul Thomas Anderson's stepmom is Asian. And like he put that in the movie because like so much of this is pulled from his life, and he has had the experience of like watching white people like put on that exaggerated voice to talk to his stepmom, and like he wanted to kind of make fun of that. So I think that ultimately it comes from a place of like wanting to be anti-racist. Though I guess your mileage may vary on whether or not that plays for you. I asked Jessica about it last night because she just saw it, or I asked Cam about it because we were in a conversation about it. I said, what did Jessica think? And I think Jessica's take is that she thought it was fairly well done, or not as bad as she was worried it was going to be, but that she thought it could have been better if the Asian women got subtitles for when they spoke Japanese, I think is what they're speaking. And I could see that working too. I think it could especially be funny if like it was very clear that he didn't actually understand what they were saying in their subtitles. So I could see that. But like, I definitely don't think it's like a deal breaker for the movie as it stands right now.
And I think like the point, that he's trying to highlight, I think like a lot of people have made the statement, like he's trying to show that this wasn't cute and quirky then, and it's still not now.
But it's not in like a serious scoldy way.
No.
Like it's still presented in this like very
like
funny,
when you do things
scene.
like this, you look like an idiot.
Yeah.
So stop. These are like completely autonomous people who just, I don't know.
You have any other thoughts, Zach, before we move on?
No, go see Licorice Pizza.
It's fun.
It's really good.
It's fun and cozy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not fun and cozy.
Spider-Man No Way Home.
No way.
I'm gonna try to be. I need a little bit of a like an open lane on this one. I'm gonna work through some stuff on it. I'm gonna and just a note. I'm gonna get insanely spoilery on this because I know that they don't care. And honestly, like, grow up. Like, who cares? It's
Spider-Man.
Whatever. It's Spider-Man. Like, move on with your life.
Got the webs.
Let's be real. There are good Spider-Man movies.
Oh, I love
real good Spider-Man.
Let me preface. I love Spider-Man. I don't love this new Spider-Man, but I love Spider-Man. I don't love
Like, as in
new.
by the new Spider-Man, you mean
Tom
Tom
Holland in
Holland
general?
Spider-Man?
Yeah, I don't like this new trilogy of movies because it's like it's Spider-Man, but he's like best friends with a tech billionaire, and
Right.
like
I've not seen
Spider-Man's.
any of the standalones, but I've seen him in the Avengers movies, and it has grated on me in the worst way. Like that stuff about him, like being
Yeah,
this heir to the throne of like this Elon Musk
yeah,
character.
don't like that. Don't like that at
Yeah.
all because that's like the antithesis of who Spider-Man is. Anyway, so
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
two things I kind of wanted to talk about with this movie. The first one is that it's, as you can tell from the box office, that people really like Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, it's the highest grossing movie of both 2021 and 2022, like already, right?
What? You can't
Yeah.
say that. Like,
That is what I've heard. Yes.
Yeah, so people like Spider, and so it's strange that like pretty much Marvel kind of used this as like a little bit of a ground to um and they've done this with all the Spider-Man. That's what's also annoying me about this trilogy of movies is they've also used this as like an opportunity to kind of like build up their other characters. And so
Hmm.
this movie, so the movie's like 2.5 hours. Honestly, like an hour to an hour and a half of this movie is like a Doctor Strange movie, the Benedict Cumberbatch character, because there's a lot of like they get into his whole thing and like his whole world, like, and so like literally a lot of this movie it just becomes them kind of pumping up literally this other movie that's going to come out next year, as well as this character who I think they're probably like, we need people to get invested in this person. Which I think is strange. Like at the end of the day, you're like, this is like his name's on the marquee. It's like it's a Spider-Man movie. Like let's do Spider-Man stuff. And that was always a problem because I mean, before he died in the movie, Iron Man was pretty much like the second Spider-Man movie was like an Iron Man movie because Robert Downey Jr. just shows up and like, hams around for 2.5 hours. The second thing is this is the super spoilery. So as you've seen probably through the marketing, they like the plot of this movie is Spider-Man like opens up this like multiverse. So like all these different characters from different Spider-Man movies come into this one, and that includes Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin from the first Spider-Man movie, Alfred Molina's Doctor Octopus from the second Spider-Man movie. I mean, literally everybody. The Sandman from the third movie, Jamie Foxx from the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like all of these villains come in, but on top of that, so you have all these villains, and so like the issue that I kind of had with them and the way that they like bring them in is that I think unequivocally most people agree that like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies are probably the best out of all the Spider-Man movies that we've had.
I think that is objectively correct. I will say that it is a generational thing, though.
It
Like,
is a
ask
generational
people
thing.
who are younger than us, and that becomes a very controversial question. But I mostly think that's because they don't have taste in movies yet. They're still like forming their brains.
Well, and also I think it's kind of like regardless of if you like them or not, like it kind of is like the face of what a Spider-Man movie looks like. Like people think like I think
Yeah.
initially like kind of the more industry wide kind of goes to that portrayal. And so it's really weird. So the plot of the movie with these villains becomes not, hey, let's watch Tom Holland Spider-Man fight all these bad guys necessarily. It instead like starts to become, I want to rehabilitate these villains because they like became like they are reacting to what these Spider-Mans did to them in their universe. So I'm gonna like make them better. Which okay, but like to me this like became like I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like it became almost a nefarious thing where so you have Marvel and more broadly Disney becoming the culture, like becoming popular culture is Disney and becoming like
I mean,
whatever
I don't think it's becoming. I think we're there.
we're there.
I
So
think
it's
we've been
become
there.
Disney. So
Yeah.
Disney has this like unfeathered control of culture at the moment. And literally it feels like Disney going, all right, let's take these 3 Spider-Man movies that Sam Raimi made with Tobey Maguire, and let's take these 2 Spider-Man movies that Andrew Garfield is in, and let's literally rework them to work for our
Brand.
for us. And so
Mhm.
there's not any like work being done for this Spider-Man. It's literally taking all of this pre or all this knowledge you had previously of these other villains and of these other Spider-Mans, and bringing them in and literally rehabilitating them through their
Yeah.
own Spider-Man
I
in
mean,
order
it's
to
it's
build it
yet
out of that mold.
another movie that is just like an exercise in like manipulating IP, right? Like
But this, but
you've written essays about this,
yeah, but
going
this
back to
feels
like Space
more.
Jam 2 and then the Lego movie,
But
etc.
but
Ready Player
this
One.
there's something different about this because it's literally like taking, like, if you had like, just for the sake of like visualizing it, like taking the text and going in there and literally just like rewriting it, because that's what they
Mhm.
do. Like they literally, like, it's like erasing what happened in those and rewriting it to like,
Wait, like they try to like retcon what happens in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies?
if we're like gonna like work through how this movie comes out, they literally retconned all of these movies so that if like we just somehow were able to teleport into the second Spider-Man movie, Doctor Octopus wouldn't be dead and he would be healed.
Mm.
Things like that. So like
I
that's
don't fully see the point of doing that other than like we need to bring these characters under our umbrella somehow. Yeah.
other than the fact that I know people will react to this, and we need to bring it again. Yeah, we need to bring it under, so that literally, to me, like on a very basic level, it feels like Marvel Disney going, let's fix all this stuff.
I've heard
Because
people talk about reacting very positively to this, like including people who contribute to this podcast sometimes, talking about like crying in the theater over like how emotional this
I
made
mean,
them.
I love Spider-Man, and so like
Yeah.
the super spoilery stuff is that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield show up in this as
And that makes
Spider-Man.
people cry?
I
Oh,
think
shit.
everybody knew that. I think there
You
were news stories about this
you
years
kind of,
ago,
I
right?
mean, you kind of knew, but like when Toby Maguire shows up in the costume, it's cool, like it.
Yeah.
And like on a level, like I enjoy that. Like I liked seeing Toby Maguire kind of embodying this character again. It was good to see Andrew Garfield, who was kind of in a mangled series,
Hmm.
being able to kind of do stuff and actually like kind of, get to be Spider-Man a little bit. Like that stuff was cool. But at the end of the day, like it feels to me like literally it's like Marvel surgery of, let's fix these movies that don't fit like what we're doing now, and let's fix them so that these generations that you were talking about that maybe like the Tom Holland Spider-Man or the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man more,
Hmm.
like now that's fixed so that we changed all that, so now it's good because of us.
I
And that
wonder, I
seems
know like
weird.
the licensing of Spider-Man has been very up in the air along with the X-Men over the years. Like those have been the
Mhm.
two like Marvel stable characters that like Disney hasn't had their hands on like consistently throughout the last decade. And now they do. Like that's why Tom Holland Spider-Man is a thing. I wonder if that means that Disney owns the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies now too. Like, are they
No,
trying to get people to go watch those movies so that they get royalties
and
for
and
them?
and technically, I mean, if you want to get incredibly technical here, technically Sony is reaping all the benefits from this because
Okay,
Sony still owns the big stake in
gotcha.
Spider-Man. So with all this box office stuff, technically Sony's the winner.
Mm,
But I'm not stupid. Like Marvel
yeah,
and the Marvel machine is what's operating this thing. That's why Sony went to, that's why they and
yeah,
Sony worked out a deal. And so it's just, again, like, I know that people will probably disagree with this, and I know that people probably are like that. I don't care. Like I enjoyed it, and like there was parts of it that I enjoyed. Like there was stuff that I liked about it. Again, it was also kind of fun to see like Willem Dafoe is really good in this movie. I'm like,
I
you
mean,
get me.
Willem Dafoe's just a great
He's
actor.
really
He,
good in this movie, and you're
yeah,
just like, why are you going this hard for this Spider-Man movie? But like at the end of the day, I'm like, what is this movie telling me about like about culture? And what it's telling me is that Marvel is coming and trying to surgically repair old movies in order
mm,
to, be the end all be all. And like that just seems to me like something incredibly nefarious and like
yeah,
insanely depressing. Like I came out of this way like incredibly depressed because I was just like, this is awful. Like
mm,
why can't these movies just live in their own, like just leave it? But you had to bring them in order to like cultivate your whole thing. And it
yeah,
just, I don't know, it's a strange experience. I didn't absolutely hate it. I think it's weird how these things are being structured now.
right.
I honestly don't see why Marvel is continuing to like make movies, not because I don't want.
Why don't they just make TV shows?
They should just
Put
make
them on
TV
Disney
shows
Plus. Like they've
because
found success doing that with like the Hawkeye TV show and
Mhm.
WandaVision, etc. Like these stories are so much better suited for a serialized
I
television
mean, don't you
format.
think they're just it's because they're making crazy money?
It's because movies
with
make
these
more money.
blockbuster releases?
Yeah.
yeah, and I get that, but I think
Maybe
that's
once like they have enough of like the American population like just consuming shit on Disney Plus and not going to the movie theater, they will pivot to that. But right now the theater is the cash cow.
yeah, and so I get that, but it's also like they're wanting things to be so interconnected that yeah, it makes more sense to just do it on TV because that's a medium that seems more conducive to the comic book way of like bringing characters in and stuff.
Right.
It doesn't totally work in the movie, you know, like I said, like when an hour and a half of your Spider-Man movie is Doctor Strange
Yeah.
proving his worth to the audience, I'm just like I don't care. Like I didn't come to see a Doctor Strange movie.
And one of the things that's great about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies is how small scale they feel. Like they are this little self-contained world where Peter Parker is the only one who has superpowers, or like the only
Mhm.
good person who has superpowers, and like the stakes feel really high. But like when you have Tom Holland, who's like already lived through the like destruction of half of the universe and like has seen like all the Wakanda people marching through space portals and shit. Like it just feels like we're not in reality on any level anymore. Like I
And that
can't get invested if I feel like there's no danger whatsoever. And I know there is danger in this movie. They try to make it to where like, oh, he's gonna die or whatever.
They,
But
I mean, again, I'll just spoil it. They kill Aunt May, but I mean, Marissa Tomei's made 3 movies. Like let her get her money and get out of there. Like, why is she
yeah.
hanging around?
Mm-hmm.
And so no, I mean, there's just, I don't know. Like, I didn't want to. I'm not coming at this as like a super anti-Marvel thing. If any, I just kind of. I mean, that's it just depresses me that like that's the way we're gonna structure. Like there's one thing to have an Avengers movie where you bring all the characters and all the portals show up and all the characters come out
Yeah.
and people lose their mind. And there's another thing to literally go and retcon other movies to fit
Yeah.
your mold. You know, like whenever we get into like X-Men movies that I assume they'll start making at some point soon, are
Mhm.
they gonna go and like bring those characters and like do the same thing? Like, where does that end? And I don't know.
Also, they already did the fucking multiverse thing. Like Into the Spider-Verse is great. It is
Mhm.
a great movie. Like you can do this really well. But you know, Into the Spider-Verse is a movie that's kind of like existing on its own terms and not just like trying to capitalize on all this IP, right?
Yeah. And so that's so again, I mean Spider-Man No Way From Home, it's literally in every theater imaginable. Like
Mhm.
I'm not gonna like endorse it. Like you're gonna go see it if you want to go see it.
Mm-hmm.
So but that's the stuff that the Spider-Man movies specifically that Marvel has made have like really like caused me to like churn in my head a little bit. There's interesting things going on that I don't think Marvel isn't like intending to do, but like just like how people love Spider-Man more than any other character in the Marvel universe. I'm
Mhm.
like that's just definitive. Like people like Spider-Man way more than anybody. And
He's
the
the most
way
relatable
exactly,
superhero.
and the way that
Yeah.
they've like used that character to like tree off all their other ones is kind of it's just I don't know, something to me. I'm
Mhm.
not going to say interesting. It's not really interesting. It's just something. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about life
Brian.
of Brian. We're going to talk about Brian. He's a naughty, naughty boy.
A man named
He's not the
Brian.
Messiah.
He's not the Messiah, but we'll talk about him next after this break.
Cool. Man, that was a long part one.
Yeah, sorry. We were going long on Licorice Pizza, and I was like, I mean,
Right.
I got a lot to go through with Spider-Man, but I
Yeah.
was trying to keep it concise.
No, I thought that was a good amount of time on both counts.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like again, like the character like this 2 Spider-Man show up and it's cool and like they all hang out and like I'm like this is fun. Like this is kind of cool. But at the same time, like the way that they just the thing with the villains just like I was like why like literally the whole plot with the villains is we're going to rehabilitate you so that you go back to your
That's so
world and you're
funny.
fixed and you're like ugh. Good. I'm glad Alfred Molina is on the money with it when they were just like, why'd you join? He's like, I don't know, they gave me a bunch of money, so I showed up.
Yeah, he's living that John Carpenter life.
He's like, whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I watched Life of Brian on Christmas Eve, as I think is intended.
Nice.
It's a good.
We watched it on Easter a couple years ago.
It's a good Easter movie too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, y'all ready?
Yes. Actually, could I go to the bathroom really quick?
Mhm.
1 sec.
No, you can't. You can't go to the bathroom.
He just farted.
He just. Ew. He just like crop dusted you.
No, I could hear it as he's walking in.
Oh damn.
Oh no, this is live too, so
That's fine. We outed him as a crop duster.
I understand. I mean, that's really got to be the strategy, It's
Dude, they had the trailer for this like Jared Leto superhero movie, or like he's like an anti-hero movie. It looked awful. I don't know who's gonna like watch Jared Leto and be like, I want to get behind this guy. Cooper, what are you doing?
Cooper's trying to drink Andrew's coffee.
Cooper.
I tried to go, the Peter Curran Library in Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to go the other day with someone, and they turned us away because the person I was with they were like looking cute, but they were wearing ripped jeans. And now the library, the bar, has a dress code, and you're not allowed to wear ripped jeans.
That's weird.
It's ridiculous. It wasn't like, it was like they were dressed up. They were looking cute. But yeah, apparently they have this. I'm trying to figure out what the dress code is exactly because I'm worried I'm not going to fit the dress code.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people like usually dress up nice to go there, but I've also seen I've gone in like a shirt like this, and khaki pants, I'm like, I look like I was going to do a stand-up set where I just talk about like my ex-wife leaving me. So
I'm trying to find online if I'm like meeting the dress code. I was dressed fine, and they were dressed up cute. Like it wasn't like they were, just coming off of fixing the plumbing or something. Like they were dressed up really nice, but the jeans that they had on that were really dressy and cute were ripped, and they were like, that's against our dress code.
That's weird.
Ridiculous. I'm trying to find it, but I can't even see it posted online. So how are you supposed to follow it if you can't? But I've got like a not collared shirt, but like a turtleneck. That's kind of dressy, right?
Yeah.
Do you use Google Chrome?
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to this annoying, I don't know what's wrong with my Google Chrome now, but it blocks off so many websites and says that they're not safe, including cinematary.com, by the way. It will not, my Chrome says that it is not safe, and it won't even let me go on the website. I can't even override the safety function, and it's making it almost unusable because there's so many websites now I can't even get on. But I prefer it, not like all my passwords and crap are saved on it, so now if I try to use something else, I'm going to have to try to figure out what all these passwords are. I'm annoyed.
I want some sushi.
That sounds great. What's your go-to sushi order?
Usually like spicy tuna. I'm kind of basic. I'm kind of basic with sushi. I like spicy tuna.
Well, I feel like the real basic answer is like a Cali roll or a Philly roll or something.
Yeah. I think I might go for lunch since recording this in the morning. I might go for lunch to this pokey place in Savannah, and they have like a little bowl. have all this like tuna and stuff in it. It's good
That sounds good.
with some rice.
Yeah, I like Cooper is gas. It is.
I want to hear Cooper's thoughts on Life of Brian.
Brian.
Not a girl named Brian.
You say girl named Brian?
That's the line.
Not a
girl named Brian.
Good to clarify.
A man named Brian.
All right.
Let's do it.
Here we go in 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 384 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be concluding our cinematic journey through the Bible with 1979's Monty Python's Life of Brian. Directed by Terry Jones from a script by Jones, John Cleese, Graham Chapman, Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, and Michael Palin. All of those men also star in the film. A young man, Brian, who was born one stable down and on the same night as Jesus, becomes intrigued by a young rebel, Judith. To try and impress her, Brian joins the independence movement against the Romans, the People's Front of Judea. However, in an attempt to hide from the Romans, he relays some of the teachings he heard from Jesus, which ends up spurring a crowd to believe he is the Messiah. While trying to get rid of his followers and reunite with Judith, he embarks on several misadventures. 39 local authorities in the United Kingdom either imposed an outright ban or imposed an X certificate on the film. Some countries, including Ireland and Norway, banned its showing, and a few of these, such as Italy, bans lasted decades. The filmmakers used the notoriety to promote the film with posters in Sweden reading, quote, "So funny it was banned in Norway." Shortly after the release of Monty Python and the Holy Grail in 1975, Eric Idle flippantly suggested that the title of the Python's forthcoming feature would be called Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory, a play on the UK title for the 1970 American film Patton. This was after he had become frustrated at repeatedly being asked what it would be called, despite the troupe not having given the matter of a third film any consideration. However, they shared a distrust of organized religion, and after witnessing the critically acclaimed Holy Grail's enormous financial turnover, confirming an appetite among the fans for more cinematic endeavors, they began to seriously consider a film lampooning the New Testament era in the same way that Holy Grail had lampooned Arthurian legend. Idle and Terry Gilliam, while promoting Holy Grail in Amsterdam, had come up with a sketch in which Jesus' cross is falling apart because of the idiotic carpenters who built it, and he angrily tells them how to do it correctly. However, after an early brainstorming session, and despite being non-believers, they agreed that Jesus was, quote, definitely a good guy, and found nothing to mock in his actual teachings. Quote, "He's not particularly funny. What he's saying isn't mockable. It's very decent stuff," said Idle later. John Cleese wanted stunt casting for the role of Jesus, who appears once in the film. His suggestion was George Lazenby. Cleese explained, quote, "I thought that on the poster to have the words 'and George Lazenby as Jesus Christ' would be something that people would treasure for at least the next millennium." After settling on the name Brian for their new protagonist, one idea considered was that of the, quote, 13th disciple. The focus eventually shifted to a separate individual born at a similar time and location who would be mistaken for the Messiah but had no desire to be followed as such. This is a nice little call out to a previous episode we did in the series, but the first draft of the screenplay was provisionally titled The Gospel According to St. Brian.
Good.
The film would not have been made without Python fan and former Beatle George Harrison, who set up Handmade Films to help fund it at a cost of £3 million.
Wow.
Harrison put up the money for it as he, quote, wanted to see the movie, later described as by Terry Jones as the world's most expensive cinema ticket. The original backers, EMI Films, and particularly Bernard Delfont, had been scared off at the last minute by the subject matter. The very last words of the film are, quote, "I said to him, Bernie, they'll never make their money back on this one," teasing Delfont for his lack of faith in the project. Terry Gilliam later said, quote, "They pulled out on the Thursday. The crew was supposed to be leaving on the Saturday. Disastrous. It was because they read the script, finally." As a reward for his help, Harrison appears in a cameo appearance as Mr. Papadopoulos, quote, owner of the Mount, who briefly shakes hands with Brian in a crowd scene. His one word of dialogue, a cheery but out of place "hello," had to be dubbed in later by Michael Palin. The film was shot on location in Tunisia, which allowed the production to reuse sets from Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth from 1977. Many locals were employed as extras on Life of Brian. And Terry Jones noted that, quote, they were all knowing because they had all worked on the Zeffirelli film on Jesus of Nazareth. So I had these elderly Tunisians telling me, well, Mr. Zeffirelli wouldn't have done it like that, you know. In 1979, the New York Times said, just when you thought that the uproarious English comedy troupe had taken bad taste as far as it could go with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, along comes Monty Python's Life of Brian to demonstrate that it's possible to go even farther in delirious offensiveness. Bad taste of this order is rare, but not yet dead. Monty Python's Life of Brian succeeds in sending not only movies like The Greatest Story Ever Told and King of Kings, but also a lot of the false piety attached to source material. It is the foulest spoken biblical epic ever made, as well as the best humored, a nonstop orgy of assaults not on anyone's virtue, but on the funny bone. And in 1979, Roger Ebert said that Life of Brian is so cheerfully inoffensive that, well, it's almost blasphemous to take it seriously. On that note, I feel like this is one that out of the entire series that we're probably the most familiar with. So what's your history with Life of Brian?
I was thinking when we were watching it, Monty Python is cool in that it's just this group of friends, actors, writers, directors, who just took on a lot of projects together with that name. And that's not really something that we have. But I don't know that there's any other.
Yeah, we were trying to think of like modern day equivalents, and I could think of like, you know, The Lonely Island has done some things, like Pop Star, for example, and there's also like the Flight of the Conchords guys.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've ever had anything like on the scale of Monty Python, like doing that kind of comedy or that kind of like,
and they're not
community-based project.
They're not using like the same characters, like with Lonely Island. Right. Are they? I don't know. Are they playing as their Lonely Island characters?
No,
or even not. like you can think almost comparable to like the Muppets and how you've got this same little crew of people and characters taking on different types of projects, sometimes playing as themselves, sometimes playing as a character.
Right.
But there's not a lot of instances like this, and I don't totally love this movie. I think this is the least I've liked it of the times I've seen it. Maybe this is the third time I've seen it. But it's still just a really admirable project in that it was all created with a group, and I wish that we had more people doing like good enough and known enough and working together like that to continue to produce and work together as a group with a name behind them.
I think that the Muppets is like a really interesting point of comparison.
Everything goes back to the Muppets, man, in this household.
In that like a lot of the humor comes from familiarity with the faces involved, and like, you know, in Muppet Treasure Island, I was losing my mind when Kermit the Frog shows up as the captain of the pirate ship that they've kind of been hyping up as like this really, really tough love, sort of like military general sort of guy. And it's Kermit the Frog. And like, just because I know him from other contexts, like it's so funny. And I think there are a lot of things in this movie that kind of work on that level of like, you know, most of the female characters being played by men who I know like intimately from other male roles is very, very funny.
And they have such a fun, playful kind of comedy. Like one of the jokes that I thought was just hilarious was when they were all scheming together to go and try to kidnap Pontius Pilate's wife. And they were like, no, we've got a great cover. We're going to say that we are plumbers going to a convention. As if in like 30 AD, A, they had plumbers, B, people went to conventions.
And C, they would be having the convention in the sewer.
And then they were also saying, there was like the name of the certain stretch of the sewer that was like, somebody memorial sewer or something like that.
Yeah, the Caesar Augustus memorial
sewer.
See, my favorite thing along those lines that kind of includes everybody is like one of the first bits when Jesus is speaking on the mountain and they're just sitting there arguing. Eric Idle's calling people big nose, and they're just like arguing, and Michael Palin's getting all worked. Like I love that part so much because it's so fucking childish, and at the same time you have Jesus.
Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Cheesemakers, yeah.
Yes. And they finally said, "Blessed are the meek." Like, oh, good, they need something too.
Yeah, they've had a hell of a time.
The whole comedy of the movie is that everybody's a fucking idiot, and it's funny to think about like this as basically Brian accidentally goes viral and can't turn it off, and that's the humor of it. But it's so funny, also weird how when we were rewatching it, how late that plot actually happens. Like I thought that the whole
Yeah.
movie was this guy accidentally gets mistaken for Jesus, but that actually doesn't come in until over halfway. In
Yeah.
Brian's head, the plot of the movie is he's trying to bag this lady.
Yeah.
And in everybody else's head, that's not the plot of the movie. And that's just very funny.
A great deal of the movie, I mean, this was something that I kind of realized watching it now for like the millionth time. I don't know why this didn't register to me before, maybe just like lack of life experience. A great deal of the movie is actually dedicated not to lampooning organized religion, but actually like political organizing, like specifically like leftist political like dissent. So, and this is actually something that has historical ties to, you know, the New Testament era. There were all these kind of like factions of people who lived in Jerusalem at the time. You know, there's the Pharisees, there's the Sadducees, and there's also the Zealots. And there were all these kind of like loosely organized, you know, anti-Roman rebellious organizations. There's actually a book that I have not read, but I want to read called Zealot, which is kind of like invites the reader, I think, to kind of reinterpret the life of Jesus through the lens of like one of these rebels, and like that is maybe like his political project.
And we kind of talked a little bit about that last week, Jesse, with Last Temptation of Christ, because like that's a character in that movie who we talked about, like he's not viewed very kindly by everybody. Like he's a crazy person who comes in and like knocks over their markets constantly. And so that was interesting. And it's also just kind of interesting, like to see see Python like make fun of these. Specifically, it's making fun of like 1970s British left-wing political groups,
and still today, like it very much rings true.
For like it rings true about, you know, how misinformation spreads like wildfire, how people can accidentally get a platform and then not get off everything that they're saying by their teeth.
Just also how
like just the worst thing you've ever heard.
And just also how like ineffectual like left-wing political groups can be, because they just sit there and like debate it. You know, like the embodiment of it is when Brian is being arrested and Judith runs in and it's like, come on, we gotta go. And they're like, let's put, you know, mark this for the minutes, and they start like voting on it.
Let's put it to a vote.
You know, like that's the kind of the most serene one on that. But no, it's also kind of interesting to think of it in the context of who people like John Cleese and Terry Gilliam, you know, rest in peace, have kind of become as like these just kind of, you know, angry, cancel culture obsessed, very boring people.
Well, you know, watching it this time, I was also watching it through that lens, because I think the last time I watched this movie several years ago, I wasn't really aware of the extent to which like Terry Gilliam and John Cleese has kind of become cranks about, you know, political correctness or what have you. And I do think that there are like seeds in here of that kind of reactionary mindset. Like there are jokes that I didn't necessarily understand, kind of came from somewhat of a bigoted perspective, that do like so much of the humor is like mocking people with speech impediments, for example, and also kind of like, I mean, if we want to dwell on that for a minute, there's like the whole thing about Pontius Pilate having he doesn't have a list. He can't
do S's.
He can't do S's, or no, he can't do R's. Right. And then his friend Biggest Dickus can't pronounce S's. Or is it T's? I forget. Regardless, like, and also like there's another layer to that where it's kind of like mocking gay people too, out of like the idea that, you know, the Romans were a bunch of horny gay dudes who were just like having sex with each other all the time. And like the modern day way of mocking that is like, well, they must have had like quote unquote gay voice. Let's make fun of that. Let's think of like these hardened warriors as having gay voice. And like the trans thing. There's also the trans thing. Like there's the whole joke about like a man who identifies as a woman because he/she wants to have babies, and like kind of comes from a misunderstanding of like what trans people actually believe/want. And
That
like,
one's interesting though, because they almost kind of come around on it, because then
Right.
they
it's
do.
funny because by the end of the movie they're referring to the Eric Idle character as Loretta.
Yeah,
Right.
Like just
they
very
are.
like
Yeah.
So they affirm
nonchalantly.
it, but then they're like, yeah, but then they make fun of the whole idea behind it too, which is
Yes.
Yeah.
annoying.
I mean, but the thing that's kind of crazy to me is like I was able to notice this time how much of the humor kind of comes from the place of like mocking various marginalized identities. And yet it is still funny in a lot of cases, right? And it is still funny, not necessarily because of like the foundation of the joke, but the creative ways in which they find to play with it, like how far they're willing to take some of the jokes. Like the stuff with Pontius Pilate, I think, it eventually takes on this like cumulative, like absurd humor
Right.
because of like not specifically the fact of having a list, but like the fact that nobody else in the room can keep a straight face about it.
Which is really funny because I was reading, when I was making notes, I was reading about how Terry Gilliam, so Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones both directed Holy Grail, but Terry Jones was the only director on this one, and it's because they just kind of needed to split up their minds to a degree, and so Terry Gilliam did like the set design, and he was very, very, very angry at Terry Jones because he did like this extravagant set design in that Roman, in the throne room, and Terry Jones didn't focus at all on like how well this room looked and how expansive it was. He's sitting, but it's to your point, like it's because they're focusing on the like elongating of the joke, and it's the point of that scene is to go to the different people who can't keep a straight face. It's not to like luxuriate in this Roman throne room.
And then once the crowd shows up and they're like arguing for
Oh
who
my
needs to
God.
be let out of prison, it's like we need to release Roger because he's a robber. Like just the way in which they like stretch these out, I think is really funny.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing with it. That's the humor. Is take a joke and they do that joke. They think of a joke idea and then they do that joke for somewhere between like 5 and 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you're how fun that is for you. I think your mileage will vary, especially if you've seen the movie a few times. The humor kind of reminds me of I Think You Should Leave, in that they'll come up with some kind of concept and then they'll just take that to as far as they can possibly take it.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, time to move on and do another joke. And that's pretty much the humor in the whole movie, is they think of something and they sit with it and do that for a long time and play it out as long as they possibly can, and then do something else. And I think it's really fun, especially the first time I've seen it. I think after, like, for me, this time watching it, it got a little tiring.
Yeah, the second half, I think they lose a lot of steam in the second half. The first half, I think, is fantastic. Like that whole all of the stuff in the first half is great. Like I didn't even the line that got me is in the first scene when the wise men come and they're like, "We're wise men," and Terry Jones is like, "Well, 3 men walking around in an alley at 2 a.m. is not very wise, is it?" Which is a great line, but. The second half, when it becomes like Brian is the Messiah, honestly, like a lot of that stuff kind of loses its steam. It's funny, like at that the first scene when it's like we're all individuals, like that stuff's great, but it kind of loses steam after
individuals.
that. Yeah.
And I like in that scene where they start to, like, they're not just saying one thing or yes or no, but they're saying really nuanced stuff, like, all right.
But yeah, this recent time watching it, like I really like this one. I think it's probably my favorite of the Python movies. But yeah, the second half is whenever it becomes about Brian as the Messiah, a lot of the jokes it's way funnier when Brian is kind of the secondary character when you're going to like the people's front of Judea and the different character, like whenever you're bouncing around to different characters. Like honestly, my favorite character in the entire thing is the Eric Idle cheeky guy who just is like making jokes like if they just followed him around.
The guy who almost gets out of, or the guy who does get out of crucifixion.
No, he does. He gets crucified.
No. He gets off and he's like, "No,
guy.
I'm just kidding. You can put me back up."
Oh.
Yeah, that's my favorite character in the entire, because it's just like he's just constantly kind of moving forward and like taking shots at like everything. Right. But like the plot of actually Brian being the Messiah is kind of boring after a while.
So thinking about people you know, the backlash of the movie
Mhm.
and the way people, man, me and Andrew were talking about it, and I'm like, Christians
They have no
really
sense
get
of
what they
humor.
want a lot of times. Like if something bugs them, they can whine about it enough and
They
like
suck. They
make
got no
that
sense
happen.
of humor.
Shoo, man.
The worst.
I mean, haven't you heard they're the most oppressed class in America?
Oh my god.
They are.
But the
And
movie, I
England,
feel
it
like
seems.
it's not really sacrilegious in that it's not really making fun of Jesus or the concept of Christianity. Like they talk about how
It's
this
making
guy's
fun
really
of
making
them.
good point. It's making fun of Christians.
Well, it's
making
making fun of
them.
like religiosity writ large, and
Right.
so like that's why. I mean, I don't necessarily know if it's fair to argue this movie is not sacrilegious, because it's like it doesn't take any issue with like the specific things that Jesus said, but it takes issue with like the religious mindset and like the historical events that kind of led to Christianity kind of becoming the powerhouse institution that it is now. Like it kind of does cast doubt on the idea of like Christianity being true, or like any religious faith being true, because there are like these historical reasons why XYZ belief became mainstream that may have nothing to do with actual divinity, right?
Just like who went viral.
Yeah. And like I mentioned this during the Gospel According to St. Matthew episode, like this is the movie of all the ones we've watched that seems most like tapped into the history of the time period to me. There's the whole thing about the Zealots being like a political movement during the time. B, there's the whole thing about, prophecy being kind of like a normalized thing in the time culturally. And then also, there's the whole thing about crucifixion. Like in Christianity, crucifixion is like treated with this grand reverence. Like, the cross, people wear cross necklaces, and like the symbol of the cross is the whole symbol of the religion. And like I remember growing up in church, like being given these long sermons about like just how painful crucifixion was, and I'm sure it was, right? But also like Jesus was not the only person to be crucified. That like in order for Jesus to have been crucified by the Roman Empire, like there would have had to be this like grand bureaucracy of crucifixion as like a standard way in which criminal justice was carried out. And so like it really, like thinking about it in those terms, like the divinity or like the crucifixion of Christ like kind of loses that kind of magical sparkle. It's just like this is an incident that happened in history, right? And if you don't believe in like the resurrection, then it kind of is like a non of no importance whatsoever,
Well, and it also like, you think of if you watch like Passion of the Christ, there's like almost like this almost reverence for it. Like they really like
a fetishization of it.
They like fetishize it. Like whenever they're nailing him to the cross, it's like this whole sequence where you're just like, can you just like move on with it? Like they really just lean into it. And it's interesting. This one, I think, Last Temptation as well is pretty good at like kind of is more interested in like what you're describing, like the act of crucifying people rather than like this one singular instance of crucifixion, which seems to be more the prevailing narrative. Crucifixion, good.
I also love, by the way, the character, I think he's played by John Cleese, who's like chained to that prison cell. Who's like a conservative Roman prisoner who like he just reminds me of like people who make excuses for like the prison industrial complex today, like, oh, we got to have some way to like punish the wrongdoers or like scare some sense into people or whatever. Like, thanks, Romans. I wish you would spit in my face.
He's like, oh, Mr. Favorite over there. He's getting spit right in your face. He's like, they just put me the right side up the other day.
Right.
So I guess we can kind of maybe broaden out and look at the series kind of as a whole. I kind of wish we had Michael here to a degree, but like I think it was an interesting journey to kind of watch these movies and kind of engage in these other interpretations of biblical stories, and even like biblical stories on like a movie scale, because we also have like the Passion of the Christ and things like that are completely different. Because I think overall, like it doesn't drown out the more like prevailing narrative of things, but offers much more. I think it's like constructive, like almost thought experiments, and like ways to kind of engage with faith that I think are necessary regardless of if you believe or not. Like I think they're interesting even in that realm.
Yeah, what are your thoughts, getting to the end of the series, Jess? Because I guess you've watched almost all the movies. You didn't watch Gospel According to St. Matthew, but you watched all the others. Seems like you've kind of gone through a bit of a personal journey, like watching through all these movies and talking about theology every week on the podcast.
Yeah,
what is your kind of like end point with this?
Gosh, I don't know if I've drawn any conclusions yet. Maybe that's a lifelong journey for me.
Of course, yeah.
We're just trying to figure out if God is real or not. This is what the whole series was about.
I don't know. My current thinking is, I think with any religion, people approach that to find some kind of inner peace. 'Cause I think the concept of Christianity, the concept of, if you're stressed about something, if you're worried, if you're happy, give it up to God, right? Pray about it, put it in God's hands, trust that He's going to take care of you, whether it's good, like whether the outcome is good or bad. And that's very therapeutic, like, because a lot of times, when I work with students or when therapists work with clients, I can't go in and change their lives and fix their problems, but they can find peace just in talking about it. And they can find clarity sometimes in talking about it too. Like, well, here's another angle I hadn't considered. I can't fix their problems and I don't give advice. And so Christianity, I can see it as kind of therapeutic for people who practice it, in that knowing like there is a lot of powerlessness, but just kind of having faith that regardless, you're going to have the strength to get through whatever.
Yeah.
I also see it as like a good practice. It can be a good practice of like of morality, treating people with respect and taking care of one another, and kind of living by this certain code of ethics in your life, to take care of yourself, to honor God, to honor mankind. But what's frustrating in my experience of Christianity was, I think, like growing up evangelical, that didn't really feel like the focal point, at least maybe after a certain age, and I kind of got to like the fact that a lot of times Christianity is enmeshed with conservatism, which as I'm thinking about those two, they just seem completely incompatible. But in our current politics, in our current era of like what conservatives spin as, like they try to interweave their ideas with Christian morality, and it just feels so far away from it. But I guess that's kind of why a lot of people end up leaving religion, is because they get a little
too much cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And don't know how to put those back together. And I think especially when you grow up evangelical versus maybe your family wasn't overly religious, or maybe you grew up in a more progressive type of Christianity household, but when you grow up evangelical, it's a very black or white thinking that is hard to overcome. Right. So anyway, just the series in general, I think, has offered a lot of sometimes comical, sometimes very thought-provoking, and just generally interesting different ways that people play with religion and interact with religion in their lives, and reconcile with these ideas.
Going back to your first point about religion being a therapeutic thing for people, I think that is present in this movie too, just in a way that is more mocking of it. But like the idea, going back to Last Temptation of Christ that you were talking about last week, Zach, about when Paul says, whether the story is true or not, I need to tell the story because it gives people comfort, that gives people peace. Right. Like that idea is sort of the idea that is expressed with like all the people blindly following Brian, because like they want answers, they want something to believe in, some sort of leader, and that makes them feel better whether or not it's true. Right. And so like there's a very positive way of looking at that, of like everybody kind of needs to find their own peace and their own like way of coping with,
Right.
the fact that you don't have any power in the world. And that's a thing in this movie too, of like,
Right.
what have the Romans done for us? We have all these like left-wing political organizations that are trying to fight back against what appears to them as like an oppressive power structure, but they
Right.
ultimately don't have any way of fixing it.
Right.
So like what most people are going to do is turn to some sort of like, in the Python's eyes, like superstition, like
Right.
just believe it will all be taken care of somehow, because they don't see any way that they can like take care of it themselves.
Right.
And so like I think that this movie gives the much more like negative, cynical view on like that maybe not being particularly helpful. Like if we're thinking about the Pythons as being left-wing artists, at least familiar with left-wing political organization, like I think that they would agree with this, often quoted idea from Marx that like religion is the opiate of the masses, right? It is a way in which people are able to kind of be numbed to like the idea that they have any sort of autonomy or agency to push back against the existing power structure.
Right. And so, and I like the scene a lot where Brian's like been running away from the crowd for a while. He loses his shoe, or he throws his gourd at somebody, and they all start like arguing.
The gourd.
Right. They all start arguing with each other about like what this possibly could mean. Like, we're the gourd people, we're the shoe people. You're supposed to wear the shoe. No, you're supposed to wear people with the shoe. No, you're supposed to only wear one shoe, and that represents something. And I don't know, like that. I think that's kind of that's how different denominations of Christianity is spurred out, and they're also convinced that they have it right. And to me, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast last week too, that's really narcissistic to think that you have the answer and your particular brand of Christianity has the exact truth. It's very narcissistic.
And so like it makes the question of like whether or not religion is worth pursuing or whether or not Christianity specifically is true a much more complicated question, because you have to ask yourself like, A, which religion, and B, which version of which religion, because it's not as simple as just saying like, well, I believe in Christianity. Well, what kind of theology do you subscribe to? Because there are a million different interpretations and like a million different ways of practicing the rituals of Christianity that may or may not have anything to do with the text.
And I'm saying all of this, Jen, not trying to, I don't know, be insulting or mocking of any kind of Christian listeners we have, anything like that.
I mean, many of like the people who contribute to this podcast are like very devout Christians who like I consider very close friends and like allies and confidants, and like talking to them about these, the kinds of issues that have been brought up in this episode is like a very like, I don't know, helpful thing for me. Like, and specifically about political stuff too. Like, I think that Christianity as like a general ethos is a much like more constructive lens to look at like the world through than a lot of the secular ways of, seeking political progress or whatever. So I also don't want to come across as insulting at all.
Yeah, I think right now, like I'm very much in a place of curiosity. Like I left the practice of Christianity probably by late high school, early college, somewhere in there, because it was just too dissonant from kind of where I felt like my belief system was at the time. And now, as I'm connecting with other people who never really but learned to deconstruct, I don't know. I'm really curious, and I like having these conversations. And I think too, what's interesting about portraying Christianity in film is that I think a lot of people who are raised Christian, maybe especially evangelical or maybe Catholic, are told they can't question. They're not allowed to have doubts. They're not allowed to question. If you question, then that's a problem. And truly, like, you should be questioning and curious about everything in life and trying to have these conversations to expand your thinking. But that was, I think a lot of people are raised that questioning is sacrilegious. And so I think in film, it can be neat to play with these questions. But that's probably why there's backlash that there can be with movies like these, because people don't want to acknowledge that there are doubts and questions to these things that, it's like you can't do that.
Well, and it shows like how impactful movies or just any type of popular culture can be. Not that they're like it's important but not important, but I think it's more, I think people don't realize how much of an imprint that can leave with different things, whether it's like, I think that something that's like we talked about, like kind of like subtle things leaves more of an imprint on this is how you should think about this particular issue than like the overt, like the Adam McKay, like here's the issue slapped, like pushed in your face, like that stuff when it's kind of lecturing you, like that's not gonna, I don't think that's ever gonna change anybody's mind on anything, because it's
No.
it's almost like heavy-handed, like slapping you in the face. I don't think that this is a movie that will necessarily change people's minds, but I think that it at least presents ideas in a way that I think it's fair conversations. I think they come at it in a relatively fair way.
Yeah.
So I was not so sure I was going to make this series, and not so sure how interested I was when Michael pitches a series. Man, he doesn't half-ass it.
No
he's
slap.
got great ideas. And I think it's been fun to participate in and follow.
At least this one didn't include something like Wolf House that we had to endure, which was
Oh God.
damn. Yeah. I'm still scarred from Wolf House.
Two stray thoughts about Life of Brian before we wrap up on it. One, I love the brick joke of the Judean People's Front showing up at the very end and just like being a crack suicide squad. Like, as this movie has kind of been exploring ideas of like the ineffectiveness of left-wing political organization, the idea of like, lefties just kind of being self-sabotaging or like self-cannibalizing or whatever is like encapsulated so beautifully in this idea, like, well, we're gonna show up and kill ourselves and call it a job well done. Also, we should probably not leave this movie behind without mentioning Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. Which is a wonderful, delightful way this movie can end.
Which will be playing before this part starts in the podcast.
Good.
So
yeah, and it's like kind of a beautiful gesture towards the idea of like, religion being a thing that gives people peace because of their fear of death. Because like death is scary, and like
we want answers.
Of course
we
do. Or we want to at least feel better about it, right? And like that's probably like aside from like the Sermon on the Mount being presented in like a very even-handed, very positive way at the beginning of the movie. The Always Look on the Bright Side of Life song seems to be the most generous moment of the movie, kind of like acknowledging that like, people are hurting and need something to make them feel better.
I don't know.
That doesn't necessarily have to be religion.
I can't decide what I'm supposed to make of that. Like, I've always thought it was kind of fun, but watching it this time around, like, it almost felt a little mocking too. Like, this guy's literally just going to be left to die slowly over the next couple of days.
Aren't we all?
Are we supposed to be
all?
like looking at the positives thing? I think there's really to make positive out of that.
I mean, yeah.
Life's just full of shit.
Life's
when
a
you
piece
think
of
of
shit
it.
when you think of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The one stray thought, you mentioned it before, but I also like the whole sequence with what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, the aqueducts. Yeah, the aqueducts. Besides that, sanitation. Yeah, that's that. Do you remember what it was like before sanitation? Yeah. I don't know. I like this one.
It's a good movie. It's not my favorite Monty Python. I think Holy Grail is after rewatching it, but it's very good.
It goes back and forth. It's like, like you shift between the two.
Also, Meaning of Life's got some stuff in it that really slaps.
That's true.
Every Sperm is Sacred is incredible.
I think maybe this is the weakest of those three, but I would like to rewatch the other two.
Yeah. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us in the series. Well, that makes it sound like it's just like everything's done.
And this is the end.
We're all done.
No.
You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we what do? We put all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Head over to
Let's talk
patreon.com
about.
slash
Sorry.
head over to patreon.com/Cinematary if you'd like to support the podcast. Thank you to our patrons. I saw that I guess maybe Titus felt bad after being on the podcast because he's back in.
He's back in.
He's back in. He
Welcome
felt
back,
bad
Titus.
after we gave him a hard time in the Shrek musical one. Thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Corey Willingham, Harry Eskin, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we're going to be culminating the year 2021 in movies with the best of the year.
Yeah. The objective,
Amalgamation.
correct list of the best movies of 2021. I have no idea, to be honest, but I do know it would be correct.
I haven't finished voting.
Yeah, I don't even know what I'm very curious what number one will be, because there's some years where I'm like, yeah, all these people, they all like this one, but I'm like, I don't know.
Do we want to make some guesses right now? Like what might be number one?
I could see Licorice Pizza, not because a lot of people put it at number one, but I feel like
Not a lot of people
appear on
have
a
I
lot
think
of
it'll
podcasts.
make the list. I don't think it'll be top 10. I think
I don't know.
I'm hopeful for Dune. I'm really pushing for some Dune.
Really? You think Dune is going to be
Really?
number one?
Okay, well maybe not. I don't know.
Let's
I
do
think it'll be
another
up there.
one.
Hold on. Let me look at my list really quick to see what is really popular that a lot of people probably put.
My list is on Andrew's computer.
My list is
Green
all
Knight, maybe? Green Knight I could see getting a lot of votes.
Yeah. Mine's gonna be a lot of sleepy hits. A lot of falling asleep in the movies.
I really have no idea what's
don't
going to be
know.
number one.
No.
Yeah.
So many good ones this year. This was actually a really good year for movies.
Mm-hmm.
Movies had a moment. Good for
They
movies.
did good this year. Last year, I don't know. Last year, I think my list was pretty weak. But this year,
Yeah.
one day, Andrew and I were staying up late, hanging out together, and I was just
You're married,
rattling
so
off.
okay.
We do that kind of most nights. And we were. I made my top 10 list with him, but it was before I saw Licorice Pizza. So Licorice Pizza is probably gonna kick something else off, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But I was rattling off why everything was in my top 10. Yeah, a lot of movies really spoke to me this year. So I'm excited. Hopefully I'm on that episode. Does everybody have to be on that episode? I don't know how it works.
We'll have all the main folks.
I'm
on the
excited
episode.
to wax poetically if I get to be on that episode
You'll be
about
on there.
what my favorites
That's-
were and why they were so profound to me.
That's what we do. All
I'm
right.
just hoping
Until next.
Annette gets on there.
That's true. I
We
think
love
Annette will
baby
make
Annette.
some. That's true.
I'm not
All right.
watching it.
Until next
Not
week.
into it.
See you.
Peace.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Adios.
Adios. Stay cool.
Arrivederci.